December 17, 1943. The frigid waters of the North Atlantic churned violently as USS Brownson cut through the darkness, part of a destroyer escort protecting a vital supply convoy bound for Europe. Lieutenant James Harrington squinted through salt-crusted binoculars, his fingers numb despite the wool gloves. The weight of command pressed on his shoulders like the leaden sky above. "Contact bearing 270. The sonar operator's voice crackled through the intercom, strained and urgent. "Possible U-boat, sir." The ship erupted into controlled chaos as men rushed to battle stations. In the cramped weapons bay below deck, Chief Petty Officer Frank Donovan loaded the experimental Mark 24 Fido acoustic torpedo, a weapon shrouded in secrecy and whispered concerns. "This damn thing better work this time," Donovan muttered to his assistant, Seaman Rodriguez. Their eyes met in a moment of unspoken dread, both recalling the USS Rowan, sunk just months earlier when one of these new, smart, torpedoes had inexplicably circled back and struck its launching vessel. As the klaxon wailed and the ship heeled hard to starboard, Captain Miller's voice cut through the chaos. "Prepare to drop depth charges and the new fish. Authorization code Delta 7. Rodriguez's hand trembled slightly as he made the final adjustments. Something about the torpedo's guidance system didn't feel right, hadn't felt right since the modifications made in Portsmouth. But orders were orders, and U-boats were picking off Allied ships with devastating efficiency. The rain intensified, drumming against the metal hull like thousands of impatient fingers. In the darkness below, the deadly new weapon waited, its acoustic sensors poised to hunt, friend or foe. 6 months earlier, Lieutenant Harrington had been stationed at the Naval Research Laboratory in Washington, D.C., part of a classified team developing countermeasures against the devastating German U-boat campaign. The Battle of the Atlantic was being lost one convoy at a time, with Hitler's wolfpacks sinking Allied ships faster than they could be built. "Gentlemen, this is our Manhattan Project for the sea," Admiral Wilson had announced, unveiling blueprints for the Mark 24 acoustic torpedo. "It homes in on engine noise. Fire and forget. The U-boats won't know what hit them." The memory lingered with Harrington as he stared at the plotting table, recalling the gleaming laboratory and the theoretical perfection of their designs. Reality at sea had proven far more complicated. In his quarters, Harrington kept a worn photograph of his wife Eleanor and their 5-year-old son Michael. He hadn't seen them in 18 months. Every letter home was carefully censored, revealing nothing of the experimental weapons or the growing fear that the torpedo's acoustic guidance system couldn't reliably distinguish between enemy submarines and friendly ships. Chief Donovan had his own ghosts. 3 years earlier, his brother's merchant vessel had been torpedoed off the coast of Ireland. No survivors. The war had transformed Donovan from a Philadelphia dockworker into a weapons specialist driven by cold vengeance. Yet lately, doubt had crept into his certainty. "We're playing God with technology we barely understand," he had confessed to Harrington during a rare moment of candor. "These torpedoes, sometimes I think they have a mind of their own." The ship's executive officer, Lieutenant Commander Wallace, represented the opposing view. A Naval Academy graduate with political connections, Wallace viewed casualties as statistical necessities. "If we lose one of our ships for every 5 U-boats we sink, we're still winning the mathematical equation," he had argued during their last strategy meeting, earning Harrington's silent contempt. The tensions between them had escalated after the Rowan incident. The official report blamed operator error, but Harrington had seen the test data. The acoustic homing system had malfunctioned, locking onto the launch vessel's engine noise rather than the submarine target. "They're rushing these weapons into service before they're ready," Harrington had written in his personal journal, carefully hidden beneath his mattress. "Men are dying because Washington wants results." As the destroyer plowed through the heaving Atlantic, Harrington reflected on the impossible choices facing them. Use the experimental torpedoes and risk friendly fire incidents, or rely on conventional depth charges with their dismal success rate against the newer, deeper diving U-boats. The sonar ping echoed through the command deck, a mechanical heartbeat counting down to confrontation. On the horizon, dawn was breaking over the slate-gray waters, illuminating the convoy they were sworn to protect, 27 merchant vessels carrying the lifeblood of the Allied war effort. Hey folks, if you're watching this video, drop a comment letting us know what part of the world you're tuning in from. We're fascinated to see how far this history reaches. Range to target, 800 yards and closing, the sonar operator announced, his voice tight with concentration. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Captain Miller summoned his officers to the chart room. Gentlemen, we have a confirmed U-boat stalking the convoy. Orders from command are explicit. We deploy everything in our arsenal to protect those ships. Harrington exchanged a troubled glance with Chief Donovan. Captain, permission to speak freely? Quickly, Lieutenant. The Mark 24's acoustic guidance has shown inconsistent discrimination patterns in choppy waters. With our own convoy's engine noise, we risk, Lieutenant Commander Wallace cut in sharply. We risk nothing by following orders, Lieutenant. The Bureau of Ordnance has cleared these weapons for deployment. The tension between the two officers was palpable. Harrington had spent the previous night reviewing the classified performance reports that Wallace had conveniently overlooked. 3 incidents of torpedoes circling back toward friendly vessels in the past month alone. Sir, Harrington persisted, addressing the captain directly, I recommend conventional depth charges only until we clear the convoy perimeter. Captain Miller studied the tactical display, visibly torn between protocol and Harrington's concerns. After a moment that stretched like eternity, he nodded. We'll hold the acoustics in reserve. Deploy standard patterns first. Wallace's face flushed crimson. With all due respect, Captain, that's my decision, Commander. As they dispersed to their stations, Seaman Rodriguez intercepted Harrington in the narrow corridor. Sir, there's something you should know. His voice dropped to a whisper. I was doing maintenance on Torpedo 4 last night. The gyroscope housing has a hairline crack. Harrington felt his blood run cold. Did you report this? To Commander Wallace. He said to mark it operational anyway. The revelation struck Harrington like a physical blow. This wasn't mere bureaucratic corner-cutting. It was potential sabotage. But why would Wallace endanger his own ship? The answer came in fragments over the next chaotic hours. As depth charges boomed in the deep, sending shockwaves through the destroyer's hull, Harrington accessed the secure communications log. There he found encoded transmissions between Wallace and the Bureau of Ordnance, messages that bypassed the normal chain of command. One partially decrypted line chilled him to the bone. Continued deployment regardless of incidents necessary for data collection. The horrible truth dawned on Harrington. They were being used as test subjects. The High Command needed real-world performance data on the acoustic torpedoes, and Wallace was their willing accomplice. The lives aboard USS Brownson were considered acceptable losses in the development of a weapon that might eventually turn the tide of the naval war. When the first depth charge pattern failed to neutralize the U-boat, Wallace seized his opportunity. Captain, conventional methods are ineffective. We must deploy the Mark 24s now. Before Miller could respond, the sonar operator shouted, Torpedo in the water. Bearing 090. The U-boat is firing. Hard starboard. Miller ordered. All ahead flank. In the desperate minutes that followed, Wallace used the chaos to override Harrington's objections. The order was given to launch 2 Mark 24 torpedoes, including the damaged number 4. Chief Donovan hesitated, his hand on the launch control. Sir, this one's not right, he said, indicating the suspect torpedo. That's an order, Chief, Wallace barked. From the sonar room came the tracking report of multiple contacts, the enemy torpedo racing toward them, their own conventional weapons, and now the acoustic, smart, torpedoes plunging into the churning waters. What happened next would haunt the survivors forever. Torpedo 4, its damaged guidance system overwhelmed by the cacophony of engine noise, executed a perfect circular pattern. The sonar operator's voice rose in horror. Our fish is circling. It's locked onto, oh God, it's locked onto us. Hey everyone. If you're enjoying this historical drama, please hit that subscribe button and like this video. Your support helps us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers. We've got more incredible military history stories coming your way. Brace for impact. Captain Miller's voice thundered through the ship's communication system as the rogue torpedo carved its deadly arc through the water, hunting its creator. Harrington lunged for the damage control station. All hands, prepare for underwater explosion, port side aft. 37 seconds later, USS Brownson shuddered violently as Torpedo 4 found its mark. The explosion tore through the hull below the waterline, rupturing fuel lines and flooding the aft compartments. Men screamed as seawater, scalding steam, and burning oil created a hellish cocktail in the confined spaces. Damage report. Miller demanded, gripping the edge of the command console as the deck tilted beneath him. Engine room flooding, sir. Fire in compartments 6 through 9. We've lost propulsion on the port shaft. In that moment, the German U-boat commander seized the advantage, launching a spread of 3 torpedoes toward the crippled destroyer. Incoming! The sonar operator shouted, his voice breaking. Multiple torpedoes, bearing 075. With only partial maneuverability remaining, Miller made an impossible decision. Hard to starboard. Present minimum profile to incoming. The wounded ship struggled to respond, turning painfully slow as death raced toward them from the depths. Below decks, Chief Donovan led a desperate effort to contain flooding and reach trapped sailors. The compartment where Rodriguez had been stationed was completely submerged. Through a partially flooded passageway, Donovan could hear the hammering of men trapped behind a jammed hatch, the water rising around them. "Get me a pry bar," he shouted to a shell-shocked junior engineer. "Move!" On the bridge, Harrington confronted Wallace amidst the chaos. "You knew," he accused, grabbing the commander's collar. "You knew about the defects." Wallace's face remained impassive. Sometimes sacrifices must be made for greater victories. The data we're collecting will save thousands. Data? Harrington's voice rose in disbelief. These are men, not numbers. Their confrontation was interrupted by the ship's violent lurch as the first German torpedo struck amidships. The impact threw both officers against the bulkhead. Emergency lighting flickered, plunging the bridge into momentary darkness before the red battle lamps engaged. "Abandon ship," Miller ordered, his voice eerily calm. "All hands, abandon ship." But abandonment became its own nightmare. 2 lifeboats had been destroyed in the explosion. The remaining ones lowered unevenly into the churning seas. Men leapt from the listing destroyer into frigid waters slick with oil. In a moment that would define him forever, Harrington found himself with an unconscious Wallace slung over his shoulder, standing at the rail as flames consumed the stern. The moral calculus of saving the man who had knowingly endangered them all paralyzed him for one critical second. Then, from the water below, came a cry that cut through his hesitation. A young sailor, barely 18, thrashed in the waves, unable to swim through the burning oil slick spreading across the surface. Harrington made his choice. He secured Wallace to a life preserver and pushed him overboard toward a nearby raft, then dove into the inferno to reach the struggling sailor. Beneath the surface, the cold shocked his system. Through the murky darkness, he saw the destroyer's propellers, one still turning weakly, the other shattered by their own torpedo. The ship was dying around them, steel groaning as compartments imploded under pressure. When he surfaced with the young sailor in tow, the world had transformed. USS Brownson was breaking apart, her bow rising toward the sky as her stern settled into the depths. Around them, the convoy had scattered, following protocol to prevent the U-boat from claiming more victims. In a final, cruel twist, their second acoustic torpedo, the one that had functioned correctly, found its target. The distant, muffled explosion of the U-boat being destroyed registered as hollow victory against their own catastrophic losses. As survivors clustered on rafts and clung to debris, the full scope of their situation became clear. Of the 294 men aboard, only 141 remained. They were adrift in hostile waters, the convoy gone, with night approaching and a storm building on the horizon. Harrington, pulling himself onto a crowded life raft, locked eyes with Chief Donovan, who had saved 12 men from the flooding compartments. No words were necessary between them. The weight of survival and the responsibility for those still living had passed to them. January 1944. The naval inquiry into the loss of USS Brownson convened in a secluded room at Norfolk Naval Base. Survivor testimony painted a harrowing picture of technological hubris and command failure, yet the official narrative was already being shaped by forces beyond their control. The record will show that USS Brownson was lost to enemy action, Admiral Carpenter announced to the assembled survivors. The experimental nature of her weapons systems is classified. Any discussion of torpedo malfunction will be considered a violation of the Espionage Act. Harrington, still bearing the physical and psychological scars of that day, stood to object. Sir, with respect, 27 men died when our own weapon struck us. Their families deserve the truth. The truth, Lieutenant, is that we are at war, Carpenter replied coldly. And war necessitates certain omissions. The cover-up extended beyond the inquiry. Technical reports were sanitized, maintenance logs altered. The Mark 24 program continued with modifications based on the data collected from Brownson's destruction, improvements that would eventually make the weapon effective against U-boats without endangering friendly vessels. For the survivors, the aftermath brought different challenges. Chief Donovan returned to sea aboard the destroyer USS Fletcher, carrying the guilt of having launched the fatal torpedo. His letters to the families of those lost under his command went unanswered, leaving wounds that would never properly heal. I keep seeing Rodriguez's face, he wrote to Harrington months later. He knew something was wrong with that fish. We all did. But we followed orders anyway. Lieutenant Commander Wallace survived physically, though his career did not. The inquiry, while suppressing the truth publicly, privately ensured his transfer to a desk job in naval procurement, far from combat. Years later, Harrington would learn that Wallace had been following explicit orders from the Bureau of Ordnance, a sacrificial pawn in a larger game of technological development. For Captain Miller, who had lost his ship and nearly a third of his crew, redemption came slowly. Initially blamed for the disaster, he was eventually given command of a new destroyer, USS Manard L. Able. In a cruel twist of fate, this vessel would later be sunk by another experimental weapon, a Japanese kamikaze rocket bomb, in April 1945. The widows and families of the lost sailors received the standard telegrams and condolence letters, citing heroic action against enemy forces. Mrs. Eleanor Harrington, however, suspected there was more to the story when her husband returned changed in ways that went beyond his physical injuries. James wakes screaming most nights, she confided in her sister. He talks about our own fish and men trapped behind hatches. The Navy psychiatrist says it's just battle fatigue, but there's something he's not telling me. By mid-1944, the modified acoustic torpedoes had become genuinely effective weapons, credited with destroying dozens of U-boats. The sacrifice of USS Brownson and her crew had been statistically worthwhile in the cold mathematics of war, a calculation that brought no comfort to those who knew the truth. Harrington, promoted to lieutenant commander and assigned to destroyer escort USS England, found himself in the Pacific Theater, hunting Japanese submarines with the very weapons that had nearly killed him. The irony was not lost on him, nor was the terrible efficiency with which the improved torpedoes now operated. We've sunk 3 enemy subs this month, he wrote in his journal. The Mark 24s work perfectly now. I wonder how many more ships like Brownson it would have taken to perfect them if Wallace hadn't accelerated the process with our blood. In February 1945, as Allied forces closed in on Germany from east and west, Harrington received an unexpected visitor aboard England while docked at Pearl Harbor. Admiral Wilson, the same man who had unveiled the Manhattan Project for the sea years earlier, requested a private meeting. You were right about the torpedoes, Wilson admitted, staring out at the harbor where so many ships had been lost in another surprise attack. The guidance systems were rushed into production. We knew the risks. Harrington felt a cold fury rise within him. Then why the cover-up, sir? Why not admit the mistake and honor those men properly? Wilson turned, his face showing the weight of countless similar decisions. Because the war needed winning, Commander. And wars are won with weapons that work, not with transparency. Before departing, Wilson handed Harrington a sealed envelope. This contains the true account of Brownson, along with my personal testimony. It's to be opened 50 years after the war's end. Perhaps by then, we can face what we've done. That night, alone in his quarters, Harrington burned the envelope without opening it. The future would need to find its truth elsewhere. His responsibility was to the men under his command now, and to ensuring that the lessons of Brownson, both tactical and moral, were not forgotten. In the decades that followed, the survivors of USS Brownson gathered annually, their numbers dwindling with each passing year. They shared the bond of those who had seen behind the curtain of military mythology, who understood the true cost of technological progress in wartime. At their final reunion in 1993, only 7 remained, including an elderly Harrington and Donovan. They raised glasses to absent friends and to the complex legacy they had carried for half a century. They called it friendly fire, Donovan said, his voice rough with age. Nothing friendly about it. Harrington nodded. The war was won with weapons like those torpedoes, and with men who knew the difference between orders and right. As declassified documents eventually revealed partial truths about the acoustic torpedo program, naval historians began reassessing incidents previously attributed to enemy action. USS Brownson became a case study in military ethics courses at Annapolis, the ship that died to save others. For the families of the lost, this belated acknowledgement brought a measure of peace. Their men had not died in vain, nor had they perished due to incompetence. They had been, in the most literal sense, casualties of progress, their sacrifice ultimately saving countless other sailors as the improved weapons turned the tide against the U-boat threat. In April 2005, a small gathering took place at the Naval Memorial in Washington, D.C. The last surviving member of USS Brownson's crew, former Seaman First Class Timothy Reynolds, now 82, stood beside the children and grandchildren of his shipmates as a new plaque was unveiled. In memory of USS Brownson DD 518 and her crew, it read, "Lost December 17, 1943. Their sacrifice advanced the technology that helped secure victory at sea." It was not the full truth, but it was more acknowledgement than they had ever received before. As Reynolds ran weathered fingers over the engraved names of friends 6 decades gone, he reflected on how their story had changed the Navy forever. The Mark 24 torpedo would evolve into increasingly sophisticated acoustic homing weapons, each generation safer and more effective than the last. More importantly, the painful lessons of Brownson eventually led to stricter testing protocols and ethical constraints on deploying experimental weapons in combat situations. Lieutenant Harrington's personal journal, discovered after his death in 1997, provided the missing pieces of a story long obscured by classified documents and official denials. His account of moral courage amidst technological failure became required reading for officers in training. The true measure of military innovation, Reynolds told the assembled families, isn't just what a weapon can do to the enemy, but what safeguards protect those who wield it. As the ceremony concluded and the families dispersed to continue their lives, they carried with them a shared understanding that transcended the technical details of acoustic torpedoes or the strategic imperatives of submarine warfare. They had glimpsed the human dimension behind the machinery of war, the impossible choices, the moral compromises, and ultimately, the redemptive power of truth, however delayed. The USS Brownson's legacy lives on not just in naval technology or military doctrine, but in how we balance progress against human cost, how we honor sacrifice, and how we hold accountable those who make decisions from safe harbors while others face the consequences at sea. If this story of sacrifice, technology, and human courage resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We're dedicated to uncovering these forgotten chapters of military history that shaped our modern world. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts or suggesting other historical events you'd like us to explore. Until next time, this is History Unearthed, diving deep into the stories that made history.